Good evening. I hereby call to order the action session of the Board of School Commissioners for Thursday, August the 29th. The colors will be posted this evening by JROTC cadets from Crispus Attucks High School. Would you please stand for the posting of the colors? Pledge allegiance.
Good evening, ma'am. The caller on Crispus Attucks request permission to post the colors. Thank you, ma'am. Post colors. Forward. March. Colors reverse. March. Color march. Up. Present. Colors. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Order. Colors. Outward. Face. Forward. March. Color march. Up. Prepare to post. Post. Present. Arms. Order. Arms. Outward. Face. Forward. March.
Thank you. We will now adopt the agenda for tonight's meeting. Mr. Mulholland, before we do this, would you please call the roll?
Of course. Commissioner Arnold,
Here.
Commissioner Collins,
Here.
Commissioner Hawkins,
Present.
Commissioner Slack,
Here.
Secretary Gore,
Present.
Vice President Moore, President O'Connor.
Thank you. And now for adopting tonight's meeting. The agenda was reviewed on Tuesday and reflects all necessary modifications or additions. Just to note, there will be one added, 8.02, surplus and sale of John Hope, number 26. Reviewing the modified agenda, are there any requests for changes to the agenda as presented? Do I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda is adopted. Before we begin tonight's agenda, I would like to take a moment to recognize some of the tremendous student talent throughout Indianapolis Public Schools. Each month, we invite a group to perform during our board action session. Tonight, students Ayanna Butler, John Jackson, and Micah Sanders with Shortridge Dance Company will perform a piece called Numba. They operate under the leadership of company directors Dana Hart and Nicholas Owens. Please welcome the Shortridge Dance Company. Had that much energy. Moving to section 2, we have one special recognition this evening. Commissioner Collins, would you introduce tonight's honoree?
Yes, this is the Parent, Student, Staff, and Community Partner Award. Each month during our board action session, we'd like to take a moment to honor someone who has made a significant contribution to the district, impacting our students and families in an extraordinary way. Tonight, we'd like to honor Sharif Gibson. Ms. Gibson is the McKinney-Vento liaison and foster care point of contact for Indianapolis Public Schools. Since 2015, Ms. Gibson has been the sole administrator responsible for serving the more than 1,000 homeless students in the district. She's well-versed in the laws and the policies and generates plenty of resources for students who are desperate for stability. In a recent article, Cherise shared she's so passionate about helping our homeless population because she herself was homeless several times during her adult life. She knows firsthand the struggles and importance of providing a lifeline. As a result of her advocacy, Cherie is one of several chosen for this year's William A. Crawford Public Service Award given by the Coalition for Homelessness, Intervention and Prevention to public servants dedicated to raising awareness and inspiring action to end homelessness and poverty. We salute you, Ms. Gibson, for your dedication to the students and families of IPS. Thank you.
Thank you, and congratulations again, Ms. Gibson, for your passionate service. Moving to section 3, opening comments. Does any commissioner wish to offer opening comments? We will now receive public comment from those individuals who have signed up to offer comments to the board this evening. I will remind our speakers that you are allowed 3 minutes to offer comments to the board. A timer will start when you begin, and I ask that you briefly conclude your remarks when you hear the timer go off. Comments should be directed to the board collectively, should not be abusive or disruptive, and should not address a topic that might be of confidential nature or that would compromise the impartiality of the board. I will also remind our speakers that while the board is happy to receive your comments, we will not respond or answer questions at this time. Please come to the podium and begin your comments when your name is called.
Secretary Gore, we have one speaker signed up to offer comment this evening. Carrie Patterson, if present, please come to the podium and begin your comment.
Hi, good to see you again, Superintendent and members of the board. I had a couple items that were given to me to lift up today at this meeting. One, I just met in the audience. The red line is free all of September, and all other lines are free September 1st through the 14th. So something to think about as you're traveling through our city. The other couple items I had of note were when we look at the policy for social emotional learning that's being brought up and the need for teachers to be well-versed in how to support students, not only who have experienced trauma, but just participate in best practices for social emotional learning. I have teachers and staff who are looking for more and more opportunities to become well-versed in that, to become experts, and then share that knowledge out in their classrooms. What they're finding a little bit difficult is navigating the wisdomware to find the professional development. So what was asked of me to bring up was, is there a way to simplify that process where maybe there's a monthly notice coming out from HR, something like that, that says, hey, this is something we've heard you want to know more about. This is where you can have that opportunity to learn more. The other thing was that sometimes the events seem to be capped at numbers, and if we could open that up whenever possible, they were hoping for those kinds of amendments. The other couple things that I have some teachers who are feeling a sense of anxiety over the new iLearn scores that are coming out, and they just had questions about how that was going to affect their compensation or their overarching evaluations. So they wanted me to lift that up as well. What's our feeling about that? How are we gonna treat those scores that seem to be universally low, even in high performing classrooms and schools? I've been to a lot of the state meetings and we've talked about teacher compensation. I've brought it up a few different times. That compensation is also directly linked to healthcare. And I've been asking for official documents to be created, similar to us posting the OSHA signs in schools. Where's the form that so teachers understand their rights when they're injured at work? So I looked to a district nearby, and what they have is on one side the workman's comp paper, and on the back they have a detailed list of instructions on who to contact, when to contact, what they are required to do by law, and what to do if a student is involved. So I'd be happy to pass those along as just maybe some templates that we could look at having in our schools. Because I didn't, even when looking at the website, I couldn't fill in all the blanks for us. So I just put some sticky notes there. As always, thank you so much for your time.
That's all our speakers this evening.
Thank you. Having received our comments, we will now proceed to the consent agenda. The items included on the consent agenda were reviewed at our agenda review session on Tuesday and reflect all necessary modifications. Are there any questions or requests to remove an item from the consent agenda? Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved. Second.
Any comments?
Thank you, Commissioner Gore. I just wanted to flag this. We've discussed this briefly in our agenda review session, but we're continuing to move the needle, and I just want to acknowledge the administration's work and HR's work for, I think, 97% fill rate, at least at this point in time. And so I know we've been making progress there, and I know that that's something that we've been discussing for some time, and at least I know in my short tenure on the board, that's been a topic that's come up quite often. So I just wanted to lift that up, flag it, acknowledge it, that we're making progress, and kudos to the team.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? The motion carries. There are no board reports this evening, so I will now turn the agenda over to Superintendent Johnson.
Thank you, Secretary Gore. There are 3 superintendent reports to be presented this month, items 6.01, 6.02, and 6.03. The first item, item 6.01, we covered on Tuesday, so I'd like to thank Mr. Haig, Sandy, and Summer, who came from Crispus Attucks Band to share about their experience at the Music for All Summer Symposium Camp. And also thanks to Music for All for their continued support of the district and sponsoring students and being able to take advantage of that opportunity. The second is item 6.02, which is an update on our innovation pathways. The administration has designed a 5th pathway to innovation available to schools called Jumpstart. Jamie Vandewale, Portfolio Officer, will come to the podium and present that information to commissioners this evening.
Thank you, Superintendent Johnson. Good evening, Commissioners. So Superintendent Johnson mentioned 3 main things we'll cover here this evening. The first, we want to update the board on how we're currently thinking about our innovation conversion applicants and process, introduce a new pathway, which we're calling Innovation Jumpstart, and then give you an overview of our annual innovation selection timeline. So you've seen this slide plenty of times. I often use this slide to sort of ground us in how there are 4 pathways for any school to become an innovation school and join our network. Use this slide when we come together to do our semi-annual reports and talk about selection timeline. The thing I want to highlight with this slide this evening is that as we currently think about things, there are 2 ways that a existing or traditionally managed IPS school can move to innovation status. Those 2 pathways were conversion, and we always make the point to say conversion comes from the will of the school community and the leader within the building. It's self-initiated. And then restart, which is when IPS recommends innovation restart as a dramatic intervention for a previously underperforming school. So to compare and contrast then restart with conversion, just take a few minutes to highlight some of the differences between those 2. So in restart, as we know, that's a district chosen intervention where it's actually the IPS administration would make a recommendation to our board that we use innovation as a dramatic intervention, and the school has been having persistent performance challenges. Historically then, the community has been engaged. Once that restart decision is made, and IPS goes about selecting a partner and then presenting that partner to our board via the innovation agreement contract. Usually in those instances, we see nearly complete staff turnover within the school, and we would expect to see dramatic program changes within it after innovation restart. In a conversion situation is the IPS leadership that has brought the school leadership that has brought IPS the idea of moving to innovation, which we would then present to the board, and the performance of those schools has varied. So when we started with conversion schools in 2016, those were both A schools. They had been A schools for a while. Over the course of the years, we saw schools that had sort of just different and varying performance track records come with an innovation application. Community buy-in has always been expected to be a part of that application process. The school has come to us with the model and the proposed changes that they would make to their existing school operating model, and then the rationale for why those changes would help move the needle forward in terms of student achievement. Staff turnover has varied. So again, when we started the work in 2016 with Cold Spring and George Fisher 93, nearly all of those staff members stayed in those buildings. Over the course of the years, we saw that number really start to fluctuate. And then in terms of the application, what we would want to see in that process and then after conversion, we would want to see enhancements. We've expected to see that, but not necessarily a total overhaul of the program design. Thinking that, if this is a method schools can move from good to great, we wouldn't need them to sort of blow up the educational model like what we have seen in a restart before. Through the years, as we've sort of, had various folks come forward with an interest to do innovation conversion, we've heard a lot of feedback from our community, from our internal staff members, and from schools themselves. We've started to sort of grapple with the question of, was the conversion pathway just for high-performing schools? And if so, what were the criteria that we would look for in a school leader or in a school in order to make them a successful applicant? And then further, is there space for a lower-performing school to initiate an innovation change? And if so, what would those criteria be? As we processed those questions, that brought us to what we're sharing tonight, which is a new pathway, as Superintendent Johnson mentioned, that we're calling Jumpstart, and developed a framework around that. So our desired outcome in doing that is to present to you the new idea of Innovation Jumpstart. So it's an ancillary to both the conversion and restart. It's sort of in the middle of those 2, where the school and the community would initiate innovation. The school is in need of a dramatic intervention, but it is not the district that mandated a restart. And then in that process, we wish to provide clarity for stakeholders about both eligible candidates and then the process for that self-initiated innovation change. Sorry, but it is a fussy clicker. So then to compare and contrast a conversion versus Jumpstart, reframe this a little bit. So now when I use the word conversion, I'm not thinking about sort of the historical context I went through 2 slides ago, but now this is how we are redefining what conversion means to IPS. What unites and what's common across both of these pathways is still that it is the school community itself that initiates the change, that brings the idea of innovation to IPS administration that we would then present to the board. So in a conversion now, we're thinking it would still be the school leader that brings the idea, and now we are articulating it's a higher performing school, so we're thinking schools that have A's and B's and have had that somewhat historically. Community buy-in is still a part of the application process, and we would expect to see nearly full staff buy-in as part of the application. We're sharing a guideline that is approximately 75% staff retention across, the current school year into when the conversion would take place. And we would expect to see enhancements on the current school model, but certainly not any kind of overall. Because the idea here is that schools would be taking the additional flexibilities that innovation provides and using that to go from good to great. And their entire application process is them demonstrating to us that this is how they'll do it. In Jumpstart, it would be the school leader, the community, or teachers that bring us the idea and the rationale of why innovation would help them move the needle. The school could have not A's and B's, other grades, C's, D's, or F's, but we want to see that they had been growing under sort of the leadership or the teachers that are there at that time. Community buy-in is still part of the application process, so there needs to be momentum from families and from community partners for this change. We wouldn't expect full staff buy-in, but we do want to see them have an established community partner. So someone outside of the school that's providing either infrastructure, fundraising, board member development, other supports that are needed during an innovation transition. Our guideline then is for them to retain approximately 40% of their staff, and we want to see a greater overhaul in school programming and sort of what they're offering, given that might be what's needed to enact change. The other thing we want to mention that we see as common now across these two pathways is we are not seeing these schools use a charter. They would stay within the IPS LEA, much like we've seen most of our conversions to date. So that means IPS would still be administering the special ed services, the English learner services, a lot of the other functions that are more traditionally associated with the district, so not chartering. So that would bring us then to what this slide would look like going forward, which instead of having 4 pathways, there are 5. So just sort of took the old slide, inserted Jumpstart there between conversion and restart. As we said, it's a middle ground really. And then we're careful to articulate that now conversion in the definition, we're naming that it's for high performing schools. Community buy-in is still part of that process. That's consistent in the Jumpstart pathway, but we are articulating that it could be for lower performing schools to differentiate between those two. So in terms of timeline, another slide we do annually for you all, this is sort of a roll-up of the major dates for the selection timeline. Certainly not all of the steps, but the highlights. So we've already opened our call for letters of interest. That's been open since August 16th. It will close on October 1st. This is the first time that we've explicitly offered a 2-year pathway. So interested parties can indicate if they think they may be ready to make a transition in 2020, or if they're applying to be a charter partner or to restart, if they want to do that for next school year or for the one after, just to give us a sense for planning purposes. And also if it's a Jumpstart or a conversion school, work with them to have just a longer runway to help them get on their feet even more successfully after conversion. We'll do a series of interviews, as we've always done before Thanksgiving, that helps us sort of hone in, narrow down the applicant pool, and we also have at that time that contract parameters conversation we've had for the last couple of years. We just make it clear on the front end, this is what we can do, this is what we can't do, this is what will always be in all the innovation agreements, this is what will never be in there, so that we don't get too far down the road with anyone and then see that we've come to an impasse on one of those items. Throughout the fall and winter, we'll introduce applicants to the board who are sort of still in the running. That's something we've done for the last couple of years. And then we start to differentiate a little bit more the application timeline depending on the path that someone's interested in. So start to get applications from anyone except conversion and Jumpstarts in the beginning of November, and then push that out till after the holiday break for traditional IPS schools who are doing this, is we just want to give them a little more time to galvanize interest within their school and amongst their community and work on that application over the winter break, unfortunately. Then we are still TBD on anything regarding restart, as we just sort of grapple with what's going on with iLearn data and sort of are still figuring a lot of things out there, and just highlighting that these are only if needed. No determinations whatsoever have been made yet in that regard. So finally, final interviews throughout the winter, and then we'll culminate in board action in the spring as the usual. The final slide then is just a slight update on one that we took time to highlight last year as well, which is just to make the point that we are continuing to try to be really intentional about how we scaffold in community and family engagement for innovation changes of any kind. So sort of start at the highest level with having folks who are still in the running come and introduce themselves to you in the fall, and then building in a series of different kinds of meetings depending on, you know, what kind of innovation application it is, whether that's focus groups with community partners and families, interviews across communities and with parents, heart-to-hearts in the instance of a restart, which are just illustrated on this slide. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Sorry.
I think the most difficult pathway for people to maybe understand and appreciate is the conversion. Can you just briefly tell us what benefits do schools that convert to innovation schools, that they're IPS schools, what benefit is out of the school that they couldn't get as if they remained as a traditional or a special school or whatever?
Sure. So I will caveat this, or sort of position this answer by saying that a lot of the things that we say innovation schools can do, you can do bits and pieces of those within our existing district structure. So it's true that within student-based allocation, you can create new positions. It's true that, you know, you have some flexibility in terms of how you supplement our core curricula to inform instruction in your school. But there are some things that once you move to innovation status, you have full flexibility over, and those are the things that when they put all of those items together would inspire any principal to just explore this option. So categorically, there's really three main categories. It's more flexibility with time. So right now, innovation is the only way that you can, you know, have teachers be on sort of a longer school day throughout the school year without doing sort of designated service agreements or some other thing because of the way that they can set their salary schedules differently. The other is more flexibility with their dollars. So they are budgeting on their actual salary, and then they also just have a little more flexibility with how they spend. And then they have more flexibility around how they select and purchase their curriculum, and can also use any formative assessment that they choose. And so when principals are looking at those and trying to think, how do I sort of craft the package that best fits my school community, innovation is the way that it sort of brings all of those items together.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Jamie, I'm wondering if all innovation schools have community partners.
Yes, they do. And sort of
Okay.
how, yeah, and it varies a little bit by, you know, how, if it's someone like the Bonner Center that's with Thomas Gregg, there's a really, you know, robust, or some schools don't have that sort of institution, but have a series of folks who come in who do tutoring, you know, who help with fundraisers, who do beautification project at the school, but they're all working with community partners for sure.
Okay, so the community partner is essentially to support with tutoring or whatever to address needs that particular school has, the innovation school has. Could you give me an example of some of the other community partners besides Bonner, and who else do we have?
Sure. So I know that a lot of our schools, and especially I can think of a couple that work really strongly with Meals on Wheels. I know there are a lot of times, do you mean like institutions or just like, or all of the above?
Well, okay, so would John Bonner then Center would be a community partner for what, William Penn or one of
I actually
the,
don't know all of the schools.
Okay,
Mostly they're on the Near
so-
East side.
yeah,
Mhm.
so a school on the west side might have a community partner who would be whom?
So I know, for example, Ignite works strongly with the Kappas who were there before the conversion and then also after. A lot of times when a school moves to innovation status, we don't want to see the community partners change. So a lot of times it's the same folks who were there before.
Okay, so in part, when you're looking at innovation schools and looking at the viability of an innovation school, then you definitely want to look at the partners also, correct?
We do, and that's part of the application process, is who are your identified key community partners and how will you be leveraging them? If you don't have them right now, who are you sort of sourcing and prospecting with, and what role do you think they'll be playing? And then we plan to have them as part of our site visit reviews when we go as part of the application process for them to talk about their wraparound.
Okay, thank you.
I can add one more thing, Commissioner Collins, that you may have been getting at. I think in the Jumpstart pathway, what we're asking for is that community anchor. So yes, you'll have your partners who come in and provide those services, but if a school were to take that path, who is your primary partner who's really going to be alongside you in the process. So I think there's a little bit of a difference between the
partner.
partners who might just be doing services versus if you were applying for Jumpstart, you have an anchor partner who's coming
So
alongside.
what would that look like? What would an anchor partner look like?
So in the example of when Thomas Gregg went through the process, John Bonner's center was really with them along the way as they were going through that process. Or for instance, at Edison, the Arts Council is extremely
okay.
engaged to
Okay.
make sure they're continuing to have the partnership with the Kennedy Center and those kinds of things. So when you have that intentional partnership and integration.
And so do they commit for a certain amount of time? Do they, commit their partnership or their anchor status for so many years? And is that something that's ever come up?
What we have seen play out is they really are a part of the application process. So they come into it already partnered together. That's sort of a part of that transition.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And
Okay.
I think
Thanks.
just to add one thing, like it does vary a little bit depending on who the institution is. So for Cold Spring, it was Marian University. I know Cold Spring and Marian have an actual like formalized MOU about services received, but it doesn't always have to be that formalized.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks.
Commissioner Arnold.
Just to piggyback on that, I know that many of schools have relationships with community centers. Mary Rigg is very active with schools on the west side. That made me think. But I know that Martin Luther King Jr. Community Center, I think, works with 40, yeah. And so I think they tend to be, because they serve the communities where these schools are located anyway. And so it's a natural fit for the community centers to work with these schools to provide those wraparound. And they not only provide services for the students, but also often for the families in the way of employment and supportive housing and a lot of other issues. So the community center / school relationship, I think, is very valuable, and I can see it being very valuable in this Jumpstart process.
Commissioner Sack.
Yes. Hi, Jamie.
Hi.
I guess I want to go a little deeper into what Commissioner Collins was saying. And what is the relationship? Like, what would be the relationship with the partnerships? Say that the partnership was to leave, like the Bonner Center was to not exist anymore. What would happen to the school that had that partnership as the anchor?
I think that's a really interesting question. So I mean, I don't want to speak like specifically to what would happen to Thomas Gregg, but I can tell
Right.
you, like, obviously they'd have to make quick adjustments if there are resources embedded within the school, like additional staffing or services and meals after hours that, provided to families. I know from an educational perspective or from a school perspective, we make sure that, when they turn in their application, like budgetarily, they can exist on their own, right? They'll have board bylaws and a process for succession if, when that community partner exit, a couple board members go with them. So it isn't that the school would disintegrate. I think it would be unfortunate and also pretty unlikely, but it's definitely something for us to keep top of mind, and we would make sure the school can sustain in the unfortunate event that happened.
I guess also would like to know what made these numbers fluctuate with the teachers that left. I know it was on slide 5 that you discussed that these teachers left, and I guess that we've already talked about it before. But my concern is, why did the teachers leave? Do we not know that story? And that story can add us a little more data to why is innovation necessary, and is it working? And do we have that data back from, I know we discussed, the 2019 scores and things we're not in yet, but I would like to know more about the data, so then we'll know whether or not, is this a good decision for us to add? Do we need to add? If a school was going to be Jumpstart, on here it talks about that they have C's and D's ratings. So now we're going to give them more necessary work where they have more to do, budget, manage time, but we have scores that reflects that we haven't gotten this area right. Why would I give you more duties? I guess that's just the thing that rings in my head. And then I guess the other thing that rings in my head is the conversion. Why would this be necessary for a school that's already performing? Why would I put my energy there when I can put my energy for my low-performing schools? I can kind of see Jumpstart as being, I guess, as a program for our low-performing schools. but not necessarily being innovation without data. That's just my issue with seeing it and seeing the information that you are presenting to us. But I appreciate your information and your data.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hawkins?
Thank you, Commissioner Gore. I think to sort of piggyback off of Commissioner Slack's comments, I mean, I think what I acknowledge or appreciate about these approaches is that they're self-initiated, right? So it's a really good question about the data. We need to look at the data for sure. But this is self-initiated by the school leaders, the community partners, perhaps community anchor, that team, which is also affiliated with, I assume, staffing and filling a board, right? So I think that that's a key component relative to, sort of the why is as we get to that data-wise and other factors is this is self-started. And so I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, but I think that's a key component there. The other question, I guess, is we talk about sort of the additional work, right? So we talk about the runway, which I've kind of pushed back a little bit on the timeline, and that's been a concern of mine for a while is, going through the process and then in March or so, a school is going through that shift or transition, which I know as a parent is tricky, particularly when I've maybe already made a business decision in the fall, right? So, or November typically. And so I like that there are opportunities through this conversion or through this jumpstart process to really dig into the runway to determine if it's a 1 year or 2 year. And so I make those comments all to say, I guess my real question there is, when you think about the runway and sort of the additional work and support or to flesh out what that future program might look like, can you talk through sort of what that runway could look like? Is the school leader perhaps still in the school? Are they somehow supported in a different way where they can step away and help build that team? Just trying to understand sort of that runway and how that might flush out, maybe using Jumpstart as an example.
Sure.
It was a long comment question, sorry.
I think I got it. So whenever we thought about kind of what the process could look like, regardless of the length of the runway, there are certain sort of benchmarks that we want to see sort of come to fruition, both in the phase when someone has put in a letter of interest until they get to sort of the interview stage, and then after the interview stage, before someone comes to before we come back to the board with a recommendation with the innovation agreement. And in it, there are lots of things that I would consider sort of conditions that show us that you're ready. So there are things that are really, succinct and sort of you check them off a box. Like I've held 2 staff meetings to share about innovation process, and the district has attended, and we've collected feedback from those meetings. And then there are things that I think are a lot more about stakeholder engagement that we're going to keep gathering evidence around. So, for conversion, 2/3 of the leadership team should be committed to coming along, and they should be gathering information that will show that at least 75% of my staff are going to come back. So in those cases, it's things like surveys, focus groups. I mentioned that the leadership, the IPS leadership will do a site visit to sort of dig in under all of those things. And in my mind, when we're looking, we have a long list of those things. It's going to become evident and sort of in this top portion before the application if somebody needs 2 years, even if they didn't indicate it at first, to sort of lay the groundwork so that they can have evidence in their application for us to feel confident making that recommendation to you. So there are always things in when a school converts, and that's sort of our framework, right? Because it's conversion and turn is sort of this mix between conversion and jumpstart. But there are always things that they have to do, like, getting their own legal hire and building their board and writing their bylaws and setting up their bank accounts and doing their 5-year budget projections, and we review those with them. Those things are all still happening. But in addition to that, we see this as an opportunity for them, one, gather more community feedback, get more parent and even student engagement about what they want the school model to look like in the future, dig deep on that community sort of anchor partner, and then also make sure they're being super intentional about what that bridge of particularly academic support looks like between what they receive now with IPS and what they would receive in innovation status. So previously, it's been pretty abrupt, right? You will have a traditionally situated ED, you will have curriculum instruction support, and then once you convert to innovation, it's sort of just a flip. But I see the runway as an opportunity for us to continue to build out sort of a transition of supports and offer more of a menu to those schools after the conversion, because they may not be ready to just select on their own. Is that helpful?
I just want to ask one thing, and that's about the 75% of the conversion staff would be left and 40% of Jumpstart. Are we looking at Jumpstart to end up being an autonomous school as well? And if so, who would make those decisions about retaining the staff? And would that be the new administrator, or would that be our district?
They would, so it would be, they would have the same kind of hiring autonomy that innovation schools do now. So it would be that leader who makes those decisions about who is coming back. In our guidelines for that pathway, we articulate that everyone must be invited to apply. So everyone has the opportunity to come back. But they don't have to select everyone to do so. And then we also wrote in it needs to be a process that's overseen by the district. So we know what your interview rubric is like. We know when you're holding the interviews. We know when your offer letters are going out. So we keep a little bit more pulse on it than what we had before.
Or any other questions? Commissioner Sack.
I guess my last comment would be that have we reached out to, I know we're talked about since our last meeting, have we reached out to any of the education places like Marion University that can take hold of some of these anchoring places, like Butler University, these type of people that we know that students are the main focus of these institutions instead of businesses or partners that may leave or come and go, or boards that we don't have any control of. Mm-hmm. So have we reached out to any of these type of institutions yet?
I have not done that yet. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Commissioner Suck, I did have a meeting with the new interim dean at Butler at the College of Education. So we're not there with they're ready to take a school, but we are talking about the nature of that partnership and relationship.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
The next item, item 6.03, is our quarterly finance update, which is a part of our regular quarterly reports to support our financial transparency and ensure the board and community are aware of our financial state. Weston Young, our Chief Financial Manager, will present that update to you at this time.
Good evening, Commissioners. We're going to review the fourth quarter of 2018-19 school year, but we will also see it as the full year 18-19 school year review as well. I just want to remind those in the audience and also at home, we have a number of financial reports available on our website. You can click on the link on that first page there. We are going to be reviewing our board appropriated funds, the experience of those this year, our cash balances, where they are at the end of the school year, review the supplier diversity performance year to date over the first 6 months of the calendar year 2019. Look at the financial landscape, talk a little bit about what we may be talking about at our finance committee next week, talking about some of the cash flow projection considerations we need to take into account. And also give and highlight a capital referendum update with the issuance of our bonds. First slide showing the bar graph that has all the board appropriated funds. This is the general fund, capital projects fund, debt service, transportation funds. And what you'll see on the far right-hand side is a new fund. And this is where the operating referendum funds that we had the voters vote on in November. Our first semi-annual amount was received in June of 2019. And so we received that in to that fund, and we have paid to support the teacher salaries that we committed over the course of the last few years. We want to continue that investment in staff. You'll see also that the bars, both in our projected and in our actual from last year, had a gap between revenues and expenditures. And if you go back a number of years, that has been the case. What you'll see in 18-19 is that gap has been closed. And so that's a milestone for us that we've closed that gap. And we have many decisions to make going forward to sustain that. But I want to highlight that is a great opportunity to see the work that we've done over the last few years. How have we closed that gap? We started the year $45 million projection of deficit. We end with a small surplus net cash inflow. Well, what you'll see in numerous slides, there were budget cuts that we enacted in the spring of 2018. There were greater than expected net assessed value evaluations. So the real estate properties of Indianapolis have continued to increase at a rate more than what we had originally projected. We also received the operating referendum funds. And we also significantly saw an investment in time and energy to make decisions about key operational efficiencies. last spring, we engaged the public, asked for their input on what type of tier system should we transport students, and we made decisions based on that input, and we've seen our transportation costs decrease over the last 2 school years, $9 million, from $47 million to this year, right around $38 million. So those are the reasons why we've been able to close that gap. I also want to highlight that when we look at these slides, we've included some reports with the board presentation. We've also enhanced our reporting over the course of the last few years, and I'm proud to say that we have posted new reports provided by our external partner, Policy Analytics, using our financial data to look back the last 4 years, school year 16 through school year 19, to look at actual year over year, and to show that as well in the current 18-19 fund structure, again, general fund, capital projects, transportation funds. Remember, going forward, that's gone, and there's a whole new way. So we've tried to convey that in a clear way to show here's how it happened in the current structure, and here's how it's going to happen in the future structure. But it's all 18-19 data, and so we're proud to have that available for those who want to review it. So instead of the bar chart, show it in the table format. You'll see the net cash flow for the school year, right around $3 million. We see, again, the impact of the actual the net circuit breaker, lowering the dollar amounts that we receive from property taxes. That's been an impact over the course of a number of years. And also see the miscellaneous income that is not necessarily associated with property tax, but is financial institution tax, excise taxes that we pay at the B&B and the like. So again, takeaway is that actual net cash flow is positive for these board appropriated funds for the 18-19 year because of better than expected assessed value, operational efficiencies and budget cuts, and also the operating referendum proceeds. The next slide shows are we meeting our guidelines of the cash management policy. Finance Committee and the board have committed to having at least 1 month in reserves. And so with the addition of the operating referendum, our general fund is at 7%, a little below that fund's 8% threshold, but overall the funds listed there are at 23%, which for the short term, year 2, is a very healthy balance sheet for us in the cash balance. Over the course of the last 4 years, we have seen decreases in our cash balances. This is mainly due to strategic initiatives. We've funded staffing in ways that the revenue did not support. We had a debt fund that was required to utilize those cash proceeds instead of receiving property taxes for 6 months. We've had retirement incentives in some years, and we've had operating deficits and also operational considerations to address. So the increase for 6/30/2019 is primarily for 2 reasons: the operating referendum proceeds received at that last day of the year, and also 2, the general obligation bonds that were received in September of this year would have yet to be fully deployed to support some of the decrease in the capital referendum when we went from $200 million to $52 million. In regard to supplier diversity, there's a number of projects with the high school reinvention that we've funded and had strong partnerships with supplier minority vendors. We continue to seek with the capital referendum dollars those strategic partnerships, and you've seen a number of those partners come before you with contracts from the facilities team and Scott Martin. So last year, six months to date, with some similar activity with high school plans being invested. The supply diversity year to date then was 10%. This year, around 11%. Next slide highlights, and we've reviewed this before, but I want to we'll review this a little bit more at the Finance Committee next Wednesday at 5 o'clock in this room. But the strategic conversations are ones that we are intimately engaged with on a daily basis. The administrative team is looking at, what are the revenues that are coming in, what are the needs of the students, and how do we do that to balance that budget in the long term. So collective bargaining is coming up in the next few months. We've got compensation and health insurance to consider. We also have curriculum materials, a textbook adoption. That's going to be of consideration this next school year. And then also a technology refresh was keeping the computers and the networks running for our students and our staff. We have highlighted that there's implemented strategies and also they're yielding positive results. So we've highlighted 3 of those and shown some of the results. So in health insurance, we did receive our $1.6 million refund from our 2018 experience, and that will provide us some needed cash flow to start our self-funded health insurance plan planned for 2020. Energy management initiatives, Scott and the team reporting out from Synergistics about $2.1 million of utility costs saved during school year 2018-19. And then also transportation initiatives, which we've highlighted previously. We continue engage with external stakeholders and also business partners on facilities operations, decisions, transportation needs going forward, and our food service waiver request. The next slide highlights the per pupil. This is typically a slide in the appendix, but I bring it to the forefront because the legislative session in the past spring has finalized, and we know what the per pupil is projected to be the next 2 school years. In 18-19 school year, which we just finished, 7,019 was our per pupil amount received from the state. That is 4.8% less than what we were receiving in 2010-11, which was 7,267. Recent legislative session provided increases to IPS. You can see it increasing over these next 2 years. And it's still less than the 2010-11 period. That amount is 1.5% below that amount in 2010-11. The funding formula in the most recent legislative session's biennium budget continued the decade-long trend of funding schools in Indiana and each student equally. Currently, the number of students receiving governmental benefits or in foster care on one specific date, October 1st, 2018, defines the need for the next 2 years and is used to calculate school funding in Indiana. The results of the funding formula changes yielded greater gains for lesser needy districts, suburban districts with lesser need, than the gains in Marion County and other higher need districts across the state. Part of the reason why legislators continue to fund schools in the manner in which they do is because they say they have not been shown by school leaders what the additional funds, typically referred to as complexity funding, are used for in order to address the needs of students who are said to have more educational needs. IPS has spent time with legislators over the past couple legislative sessions sharing how student-based allocation has been utilized by the district to align and communicate among its internal and external stakeholders. How resources are allocated to address students in schools with varying levels of need. For school year 2019 budget, the finance team and the academic school leadership teams quantified the costs of programs, positions, and contracts planned to be in place to strategically and specifically address student needs associated to their situations, which are in many cases a result or symptom of their life experiences in poverty. Some of these resources and programs are funded by other restricted sources of revenue such as SPED and Title. However, in many cases, the sources of revenue are not sufficient to compensate the district for the cost believed to be the necessary and adequate amount of services to attain the academic goals of the student. The bottom line is IPS has provided data to legislators about the necessary costs to address the impact of poverty on a student's learning environment. And the legislators continue to fashion a funding formula, not passing along funds in an equitable manner. In the end, higher poverty districts are left leaning on and depending on local community stakeholders to fill the operational gap, which the state claimed to take responsibility for in 2010 when the school funding shifted away from the local communities. So one way IPS has continually been working to fill the funding gap is to focus on improved systems and greater collaboration with our partnerships. The Finance Committee and finance team has strategically deployed cash balances over the past 4 years, increasing the interest income at a time when cash balances have been decreasing. Textbook rental income has almost doubled and has been sustained with new systems and communications protocols in place at a time when textbook rent revenues and rates are decreasing. Medicaid reimbursement has increased due to a focus on greater communication, education, and systems to validate services that have been performed for students. Grant contributions have increased over time with a greater focus on partnerships with local businesses and foundations, plus greater collaboration with the IPS Education Foundation. Facilities have been continually evaluated for best use and purpose, yielding sustained rental income and significant one-time sales of property. The reduction in square footage is decreasing the annual maintenance costs of the district. One highlight on the operational efficiency and cost reduction side is transportation. This slide highlights how the $9 million has been saved over the last couple of years. Optimizing our tier structure, utilizing our new fuel-efficient buses purchased in 2016, optimizing our routing. We've consolidated our high schools, and we've also reduced our extracurricular transportation. Lastly, I want to highlight the $27 million bond issuance that has been going through the board through multiple public hearings and presentations. We have provided the markets an opportunity to purchase the bonds, and I'm glad to report that the taxpayers will pay $5 million less than what was projected in April of 2019. This is because of the favorable market conditions that have allowed IPS to issue the bonds with a reduction in cost to taxpayers and an increase in the projected project proceeds. In closing, I just want to highlight what we're trying to message, is that the operating referendum proceeds have been key and critical to our 2018-19 financial experience to continue the investment in staff and systems. We've continually aggressively pursued a sustainable operating cash flow with over the past four school years, strategic decision-making and partnerships formed. And then also, we're trying to highlight how IPS continues to advocate and be a leader for equitable resource distribution to support our students. At this time, take any questions.
I hope I'm not being too naive in asking these questions, but first of all, I'm very encouraged to see that our expenditures and revenues are balanced, and that is an encouraging thing to see. But can you explain what it means by circuit breaker? Would you explain that?
Oh, wow. There is a constitutional amendment that does not allow for a resident or a rental property or a commercial property to be taxed more than a certain amount. And so there's thresholds of 1%, 2%, and 3%. So in the case of a residence, if your house is $100,000, your property tax cap is 1%. So it's 1% of that $100,000. Anything that should be assessed over that amount is capped by the $100,000 limit. So that's the same for rental and commercial across our district. And so the amounts that we do not get, those are called the circuit breaker and reduce our property tax that we could receive. Is that helpful? There's a team that is at the Finance Committee as well that are our advisors that have lived this on a daily basis, help us advise our teams on how we should progress and plan accordingly. So if that's not sufficient, please let me know.
Okay, thank you. It's good.
Commissioner Hawkins.
Thank you. That was a lot, and I know that Wednesday at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock.
5
o'clock, we'll dig deeper. But I just want to say that this body adopted about a $46 billion structural deficit some time ago. When some of us joined the board, we were at about 9.9 million projection, right? So a deficit. Now to see a surplus at 3.2, I mean that's that's incredible progress. And that's a story we've got to tell. We're doing what we said we would do. I know when, back in the fall, the conversation was, is it going to be what, we said this was about personnel and about capital, and that's what this is about. So I couldn't thank the community and our taxpayers and families for supporting IPS the way they did and showing up. And we're doing the work. This is early, and so we need to sustain the work, but this is a message that we've got to tell the story, and we need to amplify this because this is painful. This has been a lot of difficult work. There have been a lot of expense reductions, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears that have gone into this work to get to where we are today. And so I just want to encourage the team to keep moving and keep it going, and definitely encourage the community and ask for you to stand beside us and continue to stand beside us as we move forward, because we know that when we look at the projections long term, we know that there's a curve coming without some difficult decisions. And so, again, I just want to reiterate that we're doing what we're doing. We said we would do. The other issue, the complexity index component, and I want to make sure I understand correctly. So the percentage that's identified, DC percent school year 18-19, that 47, 45, and 42 that we're looking at in the green, I'm just going to use the top line there for district, or I'm sorry, IPS. That is students that are on TANF, SNAP, foster care programs.
On the specific date of October 1st, 2018.
2018, meaning that going into the current year that we're saying now, one had to qualify by October of 2018.
Not qualify, receive.
Receive. Okay, so you've already gone through the application process to qualify. You receive, now you're on the docket
Yeah.
from that time ago. So that would have to mean that we have families that are currently in a queue right now that are not part of that number is what is
Correct.
yeah. Do we have a sense of how many families, I don't know if that's just coordination with FSSA or other agencies, but do we know how many families are in the queue? Because we have so many families that are working poor, that no longer qualify. Used to fill out the free reduced application, now that's out. It's all about program, right? But do we have a sense of how many families are in the queue or on the cusp of this? Because we know that we serve so many more families with 47, 45, and 42% is not real, right? As we think about the families that we serve within the district. So do we know what's in the queue, who's in the queue, how many that?
So on a regular basis, monthly, we generate a report. And it's managed by food service. They'll provide a report that shows who's been eligible and received benefits in every month of the school year. And so what we typically have seen is that it counts by school how many students in that school at one time during the school year have been eligible and have received. And what we typically see is a curve throughout the school year, because kids come in and out of the schools, but they might not have been eligible, or they might have been eligible and not been receiving earlier in the school year, but they're later in the school year eligible and they're receiving. And so in conversations with legislators, and there's a lot of talk about complexity and how should we fund schools and how should we define poverty. One of the items we've been bringing up as a team here at IPS is that we know that a kid, the family situation on October 1st of 2018 is just one day, and something may have happened on November 1st or December 1st. And at any point in time, that one day is defining funding for almost 2-3 years of conversation. And I believe there's an opportunity for us to know that our systems at the state level have data about this every day. And I'm hoping that they have this information every day. So how regularly could we compute this direct cert percentage and apply on a pro rata basis and use that to show this is the need that districts have? So 47% is the time on December 1st of 2016. The 42% is based on October 1st of 2018. This is something that we are wrestling with other districts, and this is not just an urban. This is a rural. This is a suburban issue. This is how schools are funded, and I think we have data, it's just, well, if we're going to have the, you know, the decision makers to see that there is a complexity that's all through a school year, and it's not just one day. So we have all that data. It's something that we believe wholeheartedly that our kids have not changed necessarily their situation necessarily one day from another day, just because they're counted one way versus the other.
And then I do recall from one of the previous presentations, I feel like this might have been right after the session, that there was a work group of some sort down at the General Assembly, I think, that was going to begin studying and looking at sort of the future of complexity and what that means. Is that still the case?
Yeah, there's a study committee that the legislator, I think the House has, it's meeting in October. That's my understanding, their first meeting. IPS is at the table with other districts with an interest in helping inform that conversation. And so I don't know if Alicia would want to speak to the interaction that she's had with legislators, but we have been involved in at the table to provide information to that study committee. Okay, good.
On slide number 12, can you clarify for me, where do we derive rental income from? What does that include?
Okay, so good question. So one of the properties that we've held for a number of years is John Hope, which is on the agenda for later this month, this evening. So we have an agreement with a private entity in that building, and we're receiving rental income on that property. Other properties, there's a agreement that we had with Enlace for the Gambold property, and so there's some financial consideration we receive on that property. At a time, KIP had a financial consideration rental income for their facility as well. So those are three examples where rental income has been derived by other entities using our buildings.
So schools renting out their space for anything, is that counted in this, or is that, we're going to vote on policy
So it
tonight?
is, yeah.
So
So to make that connection, yes, that the amount for the facility rental income is in this number. It's not a significant material. I'd say, I'm just going to guess, looking at the numbers, probably 10%, 15% of it. But yes, that's included in there.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sack?
Wesley, I want to say thank you and ditto to the team, ditto to echoing what Commissioner Hawkins has said. You guys have done excellent work on this and reducing our numbers and being efficient. I have a question about the textbook rentals. And now I know that you guys have been very diligent in pushing the initiative for every school to fill out those forms. So how well is that going so far? And when are we projecting to see what the outcome of that is? Like what numbers of parents actually qualify for, assistance and things like that?
Right now, what we are able to push at this time is that when parents are coming into the buildings, it's probably the most opportunity that a PI or a principal or an assistant or a teacher has. And so over the course of August, as a parent or other parents, they're in there, and that's when we have the opportunity. September-ish is probably, when we get into the late part of September, that's when the forms are coming back, they're coming in, being input into the system. So at this time, we don't have a good handle on where the number is. The filing is in October. That actually defines the FRL percentage, the free reduced lunch percentage, that shows up on Compass. But we hope to receive those throughout the school year, because if a student has a need and they're eligible, all it takes is filling out that form and becoming eligible through a certification process.
Well, I want to say dittos. I mean, kudos for you guys for pushing that initiative, because I've seen it really push this year and the beginning of the year.
Great.
And I'd like to also say thank you for all your hard work. Looking at slide 8, sometimes, and I always love your slides with the, but anyway, looking at health insurance, is that savings coming, or the refund from our collective bargaining? I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand. When you were saying our health insurance refund?
So based upon the claims data in the calendar year of 2018, we had an arrangement with United Healthcare, who was our health insurer, and we basically said, our goal is to be at a certain level, let's call it healthy at this level. If we are healthier than that level, there's an opportunity for us to get a refund of our premiums that we've paid to you as a district. And so because of the work our teams have done and the health, the experiences of our families, we were able to meet that goal and exceed that goal of being healthy. And so that refund is directly related to that work. We have the same arrangement for 2019. 2019 is it's been a bumpier road. We have still the same goals in place. We may not exceed those by as much, or we may not even exceed it. We are working hard in 2019, but 2018's we received in this past quarter, and it helps us on the cash flow side of making sure we have enough cash to pay our health insurance premiums. That's our long-term focus, is making sure we have enough cash in place to pay our premiums, and that's just a benefit that we've received from having a staff group that's very committed to their health.
Thank you. And it's always good to look at positive results. Our energy management initiatives, did any of that come from maybe the effort we put forward to close our schools or some of our schools, or
Scott,
did
you
that
want to
help at all?
probably turn it over to my colleague Scott.
A small portion has. So, even though we're not actively using them for education, we still have staff at Broad Ripple, and we do need to keep them at a certain temperature just to keep the equipment working. John Marshall, we've seen some savings, even though we have transportation that is located at that site. So we've seen, I think, between the two schools, probably maybe $200,000 to $250,000 of reduction over the last year.
And our transportation decrease, our initiatives, is that some of cut back on busing that we have done, or what is it directly related to, other than?
Well, Weston explained it as a tier implementation that we did last year, and optimizing routes. We continue to focus on making sure our buses are running as efficient routes as possible.
Are there any other questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Weston.
Thank you.
There are two items in unfinished business. Both are policy updates that were presented last month and have sat for the required 30 days. We request the board's approval of item 7.1, which is the facilities use policy. Scott Martin provided the board with an overview of that policy on Tuesday. There was a suggestion from Commissioner Collins to add language regarding no weapons on campuses in accordance with federal and state law. So we agreed to add that to the application so that groups are explicitly aware of that requirement. So I believe, Zach, we're good to move forward with.
That's correct, yeah. So we didn't include it in the policy. We put it in the terms of use that are in the form, which is sort of the document that organizations, groups will interact with. So it's explicit in there and just ties it into board policy and state law.
So the administration requests the board's approval of the facilities policy, policy 7510.
So move.
Second.
Are there any questions?
Just quick, I don't remember, I probably should know this. Is it mentioned use of alcohol or alcohol on it? Is that part of the policy? Is it in there?
It is now. Before it was part of it was either administrative guidelines or the application, but I included it in the policy now. So as you read it, it's in all those places.
Thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. Next item 7.02, is our use of tobacco policy. And so the administration requests the board's approval of policy 7434. Zach Mulholland gave the board a update and refresher on that policy as well on Tuesday evening.
Have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. I'll move us into new business. There are 2 items, and I believe Commissioner Gore, you noted 8.02 is an additional item. Item 8.01 was an overview of additional architect and engineer approvals that we request the board's approval of. There were 3 firms for which we seek approval, and Scott presented a brief overview of those requests on Tuesday evening.
Have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. Item 8.02 covers Resolution 7833, which is the surplus declaration and sale of John Hope School 26. The administration requests the board's approval of the resolution, which declares the building as surplus and approves our ability to move forward in the sale of that property.
Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Any discussion?
I would just like to thank those people, you know who they are, who have spent a great deal of time on this. It's been an ongoing process, and we've been very well represented, and we've come back and forth, and both sides have made concessions, so I think it's a good thing moving forward, and I really appreciate the effort and time that went into it to get to this very favorable conclusion.
I think we all agree with that.
Yes, definitely.
Any opposed? All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries.
So that concludes new business.
Does any commissioner wish to offer closing comments? Commissioner Collins.
Yes, I just want to say that congratulations to Genevieve McLeish Petty, who received an Indiana Department of Education award for her STEM program at Cold Spring School. She is, knowing her personally, I know she's energetic, creative, and a real dynamo and a real asset to the district.
Commissioner Hawkins.
Thank you. So I would be remiss if I didn't note that on September 17th, it's National Dads Take Your Children to School Day. So as a dad, I'll be excited to walk my babies in to school. So I just want to lift that up for dads, uncles, grandfathers, cousins, fake cousins, pretend cousins, whatever that might be, but just excited about that opportunity. So just wanted to lift that up.
Okay. Superintendent Johnson, do you have any comments?
Thank you. Yes, just want to share we're now 4 weeks into the school year, believe it or not. They've gone very quickly, so I want to say thank you to the team, our district leadership, for their hard work in getting the year started off smoothly. It was reported by a number of principals, one of our smoothest starts in recent years, so that does not happen without a lot of hard work from a lot of people. So just a debt of gratitude to the team, and also a big welcome to our new teachers. We have several across our buildings, and they are now settling in. And I remember that first year and what it was like, so excited for them and the journeys that they are on as new teachers in Team IPS. We also are off and running with a lot of our fall sports, volleyball, football, golf, I believe, so invite everyone to catch our students in action on the field or on the court. As Ms. Patterson mentioned, the Red Line launches here in the next week. So we're excited as partners with Indigo for that launch and excited for our students to have that opportunity to take advantage of, and we'll also encourage everyone else to do so as well. And then hot off the press from Christian Strickland and our team, we're really excited for Showcase of Schools. We have a location and a date that we are ready for, so happy to share that Showcase will be held on Sunday, November 10th. From 1 to 5 p.m. You all will get actual invites shortly. And we're moving to a new location. We'll be at Bankers Life Fieldhouse this year, and a great partnership that we are developing with the Pacers. So very excited, more information to come, but want to make sure folks save the date for that great event. That is it.
Thank you. Our next meeting will be our Finance Committee meeting on Wednesday, September 4th, in this room beginning at 5. Having completed all items on the agenda, the meeting stands adjourned.